one of the most puzzling things about these plants is that they have characters that seem irreducible. For instance, psilocybin, it is the science fiction drug. In other words, it says, we have been denizens of this planet for 400 million years. Our original home planet is in the M5-83C system. We are connected via hyperspace to all intelligent life forms in the galaxy. It shows you enormous machines in orbit around alien planets. It talks about the end of history and the collectivizing of humanity, and it's this enormous hortatory, salvational, dramatic, science fiction type scenario. Well, then you take ayahuasca, which in molecular terms is just a few nitrogens are moved around. I mean, it's basically the same thing, and you get a completely different message. You feel the energy of the rainforest and the rivers, and it's very feminine. You think about childbirth, you think about the continuity of generations, you think about the mystery of the meat, you think about tantric sexuality. It's all redirected back into the human and natural world in some way. And then, of course, DMT, which I described this morning, which the DMT elves are not from outer space, or they don't present themselves that way. In fact, one of the odd things about the DMT thing is that you have the feeling that this space that you break into, even though it's large, some people even refer to the dome of DMT. That tells you they really were there. But wherever this huge vaulted space is, you have the feeling, although it's hard to explain how you know this, but you have the feeling that you're way, way, way underground, which fits with the elf motif. You're in the hall of the Mountain King. You're under the hills with the little people who retreated under the hills. The character of these things is one of the most puzzling things about them.
And how do you relate all these different species of gremlins to the logos that shows the part I was wondering?
Well, that's a real question. The logos seems more. First of all, it doesn't crack jokes and do quadruple entendre puns and stuff like that. It's more like a wise and loving teacher. These DMT things are, it's a troupe of maddened elves, and they are just doing their own thing. And then with ayahuasca, though some people claim they contact an entity, it hasn't been like that for me. It seems to me that on ayahuasca, you become like a camera. You just fly through a visual world. I mean, after a good ayahuasca trip, you just feel like your eyes are bugging out of your head. I mean, it's like buying prints on Madison Avenue, and you've just been looking and looking and looking, and you literally have to give your eyes a rest after an ayahuasca trip. And the ayahuasca visions are more, they seem to cover a broader spectrum. The psilocybin hallucinations tend toward this highly polished, machine-like, insect-like, outer space bit, and the ayahuasca hallucinations are wonderful pastels, laces, layering of colors. And then one of the most interesting things to me about ayahuasca, and I just cannot understand how this works. If I could, I'd be Erte or somebody. And that is that you, in the middle of the ayahuasca trip, you can suggest motifs. You can lead it so that, for instance, you can say to it, Art Deco. And suddenly there will be thousands of candy dishes cigarette lighters, champagne buckets, automobiles, stained glass windows, doorknobs, silverware, all rolling in black space in front of you, all the perfect exemplification of this aesthetic, the Art Deco aesthetic. And then you can say to it, okay, Italian Baroque. And it just like that, suddenly altarpieces, Madonnas, martyred saints, and fantastic scroll work and fleur-de-lis. And you can say, well, surprise me. And then you will get a coherent style, like Art Deco, like Italian Baroque, except that nobody's ever bothered to realize it on this planet. But it's as coherent. It's like, 20 years ago there was no such thing as Southwest as a style. This weird thing coming out of Santa Fe that I notice has planted its roots deep here as well. The turquoise and beige endlessness of feathers and hammered titanium and all that. Well, that's an aesthetic that has cohered in the last 20 years and come into being. There seem to be an infinite number of these things, as different as the bronzes of the Han Dynasty are to a Dali or a Pollock or a Bosch. And then you can say to it, going beyond the surprise me challenges, what I always say to it is, I want to see more of what you are for yourself. And then it's like there's this low organ tone, and it begins to lift the veils, and the temperature in the room drops about 20 degrees. And after about 20 seconds of that, you just say, enough of how you are for yourself. Because you can tell what's happening is it's starting to reveal something so peculiar and so untailored for the human mind or eye that you become afraid. You say, can we go back to dancing mice, Art Deco cigarette lighters, and Baroque altarpieces, please? This is turning into deep water as far as I'm concerned. So, yes.
What happens on higher than, if anything, higher than 5 grams per ounce? How can you go? 10 grams, 20?
Oh, that's a good question. Good question. It requires a small detour into pharmacology. The concept, which all pharmacologists are familiar with, and which you should be too if you're going to deal in this realm, called LD50. This is not a pretty notion, but a necessary one. It stands for lethal dose 50. What does this mean? It means if we have 100 mice, how much psilocybin do we have to give each mouse to kill half of them? Do you see? LD50. Half the sample dies at the LD50 dose level, whether it's graduate students or rats. Now, when you're designing a drug, or when you're thinking about a drug, what you want is a drug with an extremely high LD50 opposed to its effective dose. So say the effective dose of psilocybin is probably about 0.5 milligrams per kilogram. And the LD50 is probably 200 milligrams per kilogram. The LD50 of psilocybin is 400 times the effective dose. This is a pharmacologist's way of saying this is very, very safe.
So if you eat a pound, you're going to die.
A pound wouldn't kill you. I don't think. It might be getting close, but you'd have to eat in that range to die. Now, some drugs have horrendous LD50 to effective dose profiles. Unfortunately, and I hope I don't rain on anybody's parade here, MDMA has a terrible LD50 profile. The effective dose is 125 milligrams. You can kill yourself with 1,000 milligrams. So that's not good at all. Because sure as hell, some street person or some depressed person or some maniac is going to take 1,000 milligrams, and then you've got a stiff on your hands. So, yeah.
I recently read